And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi everyone, now for your aviation weather. Meteorologist Joel Curtis here. The forecasts are issued Friday, April 4th. So I want to give you a real quick picture first of the synoptic situation that's really facing us, because there's a lot of hazards in southern Alaska, and then there's this stationary front that goes up to a low and all the way up from Dutch Harbor through Norton Sound and on up to Kaktovik. There's a whole line of bad weather that's there that's inclement for flying. So I wanted to show you the setup, because the cold side of this is where we have a lot of our icing problems, but the entire area really has a lot of problems with turbulence. So let's move on. So for flying weather on Saturday morning, we've got IFR across southwestern Alaska, almost up to Norton Sound, lots of marginal VFR all the way up to the North Slope. There's IFR down in the eastern Aleutians, also up to Kodiak Island and through Prince William Sound. There will also be some IFR on the western part of Cook Inlet, as well as some IFR moving into the pass area, White and Chilkoot Pass for southeast Alaska, and IFR offshore for the Gulf of Alaska. By the afternoon, there's a lot of IFR over the mountain areas of southeast Alaska, also marginal VFR for a good portion of that area. And then we have lots of IFR over the Gulf, and including Prince William Sound and Kodiak Island. Marginal VFR generally up through the Alaska Range. Also, we have a good area of IFR from southwestern Alaska on down to almost to Alaska, and then out into the Gulf. And now some new IFR has developed over the North Slope, as well as we've got some in the western Bering as another weather system approaches that area. Then for Sunday morning, extensive IFR. Again, it's that long stretch that you see in western Alaska is really associated with that stationary front and a trough line that it's going to set up in that area. And then the North Slope and a good portion of the Chukchi Sea with IFR, marginal VFR elsewhere. Also some IFR in the south of St. Lawrence Island on up to Cape Bermondsov and even up to Cape Newenham. And then the Gulf has either IFR or marginal VFR, especially along the coastlines where the precipitation is being forced up by the mountains. We do have extensive IFR for the Panhandle and over to Prince William Sound and also Kennedy Entrance. And then as we get to Sunday afternoon, we're seeing conditions starting to lay down a little bit, and maybe there'll be some opportunities for flying. But the Alaska Range has got a good stretch of IFR, along with Prince William Sound, some of the North Gulf Coast, also Chilkoot and White Pass IFR, and then marginal VFR for a lot of southeast Alaska. Also mostly marginal VFR for the North Slope, some moving outside of Kotzebue Sound, and then marginal VFR for the far western Aleutians and the western Bering Sea. So let's go to our pass forecast. First of all, Anatovik VFR, but to the west, expecting marginal VFR to go down to IFR on Saturday. And then the same thing for Atigun Pass, VFR, but to the northern sections as you exit the pass, if you're flying south to north, marginal VFR to IFR. Now for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expecting IFR all day and lots of turbulence. So that's you'll see that in the turbulence forecast when we've got that coming up here. Rainy Pass, IFR and turbulence. Windy Pass, marginal VFR. For Isabel Pass, IFR and turbulence, some wind coming through the pass. And then for Mentasta Pass, marginal VFR going to VFR. For Tahiti Pass, IFR and lots of turbulence. And for Portage Pass, IFR, turbulence and low-level wind shear. For Chilkoot and White Pass, we're expecting turbulence to develop and also IFR for both Chilkoot and White all day. So our freezing levels is a real mess. What's happening is in the early morning, that freezing level will be at the surface for all but except the southernmost portion of the state and parts of southeast Alaska. But with some temperature inversions and all that warm air coming up ahead of that system, and it's moist too, is got a real complex of freezing levels anywhere from 2,000 to about 6,000 as you get inland. And then also there's an area of increasing freezing level far south of the western Aleutians. So that sets up an icing. Now note that I've got considerable moderate in the forecast from freezing level to about 14,000 all the way from the Panhandle over to Prince William Sound, all of Cook Inlet, into the western part of Cook Inlet with the Alaska Range. And then that band I've been talking about for the last few days is going to be freezing level to 8,000 for moderate as we go up to the North Slope. But as you get further south, it's going to be surface to about 12,000 feet on the west side of that band. So I wanted to express the difference there. It's going to be freezing level up to the freezing level on one side, but up to the surface on the other side. And then that band moving into the western Aleutians there, freezing level to 14,000 feet. But notice that we have isolated moderate turbulence just about covering the entire state. So for our jet stream, there's the energy down there, 110 to 110 knot southeasterlies in the Gulf of Alaska. That's the big story. That's what's pumping up the moisture over the state. In the meantime, there's a westerly jet now shaping up south of the Aleutians up to about 115 knots. So when we get to our 9,000 foot winds, notice that for southeast Alaska and then all the way south of Haida Gwaii, we've got anywhere from 60 to 70 knots ramping up out of the south and southeast. So that's what we're going to be keeping our eye on. And then we've got northerlies coming down on the backside of that trough and stationary front that I've been talking about. So the northerlies are ramping up to about 45 knots and then 35 knots in the central interior out of the southwest. That's also for our 3,000 foot winds. Now note those very strong winds off the Panhandle and then on over to Cook Inlet. And also, I didn't really care for the forecast in this model for the Cook Inlet area, so I also put some 45 knots at 3,000 feet for lower Cook Inlet and maybe even into upper Cook Inlet, but certainly through Lake Clark and Merrill Passes. And then when we get over on the other side of that trough I've been talking about, ramping up to northerly 50 knots on that, and then you can see the southeasterly setting up south of the western Aleutians. Also, we got some polar easterlies just offshore for the North Slope. So that sets up where our turbulence is, and that'll be one of the really big challenges flying on Saturday. Now note that we've got low-level wind shear indicated in the whole band from southeast Alaska down through Shelikof Strait. That level is going to be surface to about 10,000 feet. And then the northerlies that's set up surface to about 4,000 feet over the Nunivak Island. And then as you come down about surface to about 6,000 feet as you get over Dutch Harbor. And in the meantime, a little bit for Shemya, surface to 3,000 feet. So extensive turbulence in that circulation around the low that I've indicated on this chart. And also just pay attention to the forecast tomorrow because it'll be trending down in the afternoon. But still be wary that this still could be going on in the afternoon. So that's it for your aviation forecast. Thanks for tuning in. Please file a flight plan and fly safe out there. Thank you.